Well, welcome to the symposium for Whalefest. I'd like to thank you all for coming. My name is Dan Hafley. I'll be your Master of Ceremonies for today. And first, I'd like to thank the Old Fishermen's Wharf Association for putting this event on. All the businesses of the wharf. It's been very tough the last couple of years, but they've been sponsoring Whalefest for many years in order to increase the public's appreciation for the mighty whale and its many species. I'd also like to thank the Monterey Bay Aquarium for providing us this building, and thank Amy Wolfram for showing up today in order to let us in and make sure that we're all safe. And she'll be working tomorrow on legislation in Sacramento that the aquarium is behind relative to deep sea mining and keeping our environment safe. So thank you very much, Amy, for that. I would like to start us off by introducing our first speaker, who's Kelly Sorenson. And his bio officially says that he's been executive director of Ventana Wildlife Society since 2003, and he has his BS degree in Wildlife and Fisheries Management from West Virginia University, Master's in Public Administration from Golden Gate University, and he's been working before in getting involved with California Condor. He was involved with Peregrine Falcon and the Bald Eagle. Really, the story about Kelly is he's one of these people who works very hard, builds alliances amongst unlikely allies because you have to. That's part of the conservation story, is getting people who are hunters and others to care about these species. And Kelly has worked very hard on that. And I really appreciate it. And I'd like to ask you to give a nice warm welcome to Kelly Sorenson.
Thank you, Dan. I really appreciate being here today to share with you about California condors. Spent the last 25 years or so working with this species, so I've kind of fallen in love with them, and my goal is that you'll fall in love with them by the time we're done here today. By the way, how do I, oh, it's right here, isn't it? Just so I advance?
So, yeah, forward.
Forward and back.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, all right, no problem. It was mentioned I was from West Virginia. This is really, I like to point this out just because I think it's important for everybody to have meaningful experiences in the outdoors, and West Virginia affords that very, very well. I had a chance to run around in the woods and eventually get involved with a raptor rehab center. I took this red-tailed hawk here photographed to classrooms, and shared with kids all over the state of West Virginia just how amazing raptors are. And then that led to a job working with peregrine falcons when I had that 1991 mullet there. And anyway, I just think it's important for everybody, whatever field they're in, if it's in marine, context, and obviously getting out there in the ocean is super important at a young age, and having meaningful, positive experiences. What about Ventana Wildlife Society? Because that's what brought me here to California back in 1991, actually right after that peregrine work. The organization was releasing bald eagles on the coast of Big Sur, and I had some volunteer experience with that species, so that gave me a nice little leg up, and I drove across the country not knowing a soul. And this was prior to the internet, really. At least widespread use of internet, and I just didn't have any idea what Big Sur looked like, and it was just an amazing experience to drive down the coast for the first time and realize, oh my gosh, this is going to be where I work. So obviously stuck around. The organization is really focused on recovering species and also providing meaningful outdoor experiences for youth and families. And to a lesser extent, we will do some consulting to help sort of mitigate the interaction that there might be caused by, say, power lines or wind turbines or things like that, where we can step in and use science to help guide good decision making. I mentioned the bald eagles because this is a big success story for us. This is what led to the invitation to reintroduce California condors. And when I first came out to California and we were releasing these birds, a lot of them were just taking off immediately after release. And there wasn't a real good track record of seeing these birds in subsequent years. And I was really worried about that. And so we came up with a new strategy, just a tiny little tweak in the release methodology. Believe it or not, all it was we released them at a much younger age before they were able to fly. And then they wouldn't take off right away. And then they would eat, and then they would get, reinforced in that way, that positive reinforcement, and they realized, hey, maybe this isn't the right place to stick around. And that completely changed everything. And we would release about 12 eagles per year, and usually we would find 10 or 11 of them a year later, still in the region. So it was amazing how this one tiny little tweak made all the difference. And the goal was to only have 4 breeding pairs in Central California, and at last count we had 30. And every icon there represents approximate location, and so they're mostly around Nacimiento and Santa area, and all the way up in Marin Headlands. Before this reintroduction took place, we had no nesting bald eagles for 60 years. They were only found in Northern California, Canada, and Alaska, pretty much. There was a small pocket population in Florida and Arizona at the time, and Minnesota in the Great Lakes area. But otherwise, all of the lower 48 states pretty much was nearly wiped out. There was only about 500 nesting pairs of bald eagles in the 1960s when the Endangered Species Act was passed. And I don't even know what it is now. It's probably something like 30 or 40,000. And that's not including Canada and Alaska. So I love to emphasize that success story. It wasn't just reintroduction, of course. We just did a small part in redistributing the birds here locally. But it was the banning of DDT, the pesticide that caused eggshell thinning, that was the ultimate key in their success. The Condor program has many partners. It's one of the things that I enjoy most about this work is I get to work with lots of different zoos, government agencies, and other NGOs. The Peregrine Fund is reintroducing condors in Arizona, and a wonderful group. In fact, the first peregrine job I worked on it was through the Peregrine Fund. So just, really an honor to work with these entities. Currently, the condor population is scattered in these locales only. And just a matter of next week, actually, we're transferring the Yurok tribe's first cohort of condors that are going to be released in Northern California later this year. They're currently in San Simeon in one of our holding facilities, and they're going to be driven up there next week and released. That'll be the first cohort to go out. We're really excited to work with the Yurok tribe, and that's all the way up in Northern California near the Oregon border, and I just have not yet added them to the map. Just a quick history on our program. We got started in 1997. It was right after the bald eagle work. Our first effort was in Big Sur, and that's still our mainstay of our effort. We call it the Big Sur Condor Sanctuary. And then in 2003, we realized we needed to expand the collaboration further and set out to create another release site. And we looked at Henry Coast State Park all the way to the north and Pinnacles all the way to the south. Obviously, Pinnacles was chosen, and now they operate their effort independently so that we are now collaborating to manage the flock here in Central California. And then, right after that, in 2006, we had our first condor nesting attempt. And that closed a 100-year gap in Monterey County and was very, very exciting. Now, a little bit about the condor. You have to understand a few things. One is they're very long-lived. We don't really know how long they live, but we know that the oldest California condor is in his 50s and doing incredibly well. We know that Andean condors, which are closely related, have lived in captivity into their 70s. So, very long-lived species, and kind of like humans. But then they they reproduce slowly, also kind of like humans. But that's not the problem. It's not the reproductive rate that's the problem. And the reason why I keep drawing the parallel to humans is because they reproduce faster than we do, yet there's what, 8 billion of us on this planet? So it's not reproduction that brought them to near extinction. They lay one egg at a time, and they take about 2 months to incubate that egg, and then both members of the pair, and sometimes even trios, will work together to raise one chick. That chick won't even leave the nest until 6 months of age, and then it's still cared for another 6 months or longer after that. So they typically breed once every other year. So breeding rate's not the problem. What is? Well, obviously mortality, but I'll get into that here in a bit. First, you gotta see the Big Sur habitat. Of course, all of you have and know it well. But it works incredibly well for this species to be able to have not only the coastline in Big Sur, but in just a short little flight for them, 30, 40-minute flight, they can be in Pinnacles and in this habitat where there's lots and lots of foraging opportunities as well. So how we went about this project, at first, there's no manual. The Fish and Wildlife Service had a couple of years of experience releasing, so they had some tips and pointers. But our first release was basically just a little plywood box, and once the birds were out of the box, we tore it all down, and then they were left to kind of fend for themselves. And they all went in different directions, and one young condor even went into the post ranch business office and hopped up onto the desk of an employee, and they liked him so much they named him Walter. That's actually what gave the idea to name these birds. But anyway, so these birds are, well, delicate to raise, put it that way, difficult to raise. And you see those puppets a lot of the time, and you see the news, you see the Condor program, and you see those like Condor fake puppets, you know, feeding the chick. Well, that's cute and all, but really it's kind of like sea otters, you know, and a lot of other species. The best thing is the real thing, the real parents, you know, and no amount of trickery behind this little puppet can do it justice. And so unfortunately, these birds were so used to people, they got into all kinds of trouble. So we tore all that down, we completely started over, and we built a pen that looked like this. This is the second one. We're actually building that facility for the third time now, but I'll explain that later. The idea was that we wanted to have a large enough flight pen where we could bring these captive bred birds into the field and let them get familiar and let them get comfortable. Again, back to that bald eagle analogy, give them plenty of time to get used to being in this environment. And then we also put a mentor inside, an adult mentor that kind of kept them in line and taught them about condor hierarchy. And after we started doing that, the population just really started to take off. The success per release cohort just dramatically shot up. So the Pinnacles pen also very similar. This to the very left here. Yeah, I think I can do that. Yeah, this in the top left. It's called a double door trap, and the idea is that we can allow condors that have already been released back into the pen because they're so social. They want to interact with one another. If there's birds inside, especially if there's food inside, the wild birds want to get in there so that they can dominate the birds on the inside and get the food. And so it's using their social tendencies for their benefit. And so once we trap them, then we can test for things, you know, health exams and so on, and help keep these birds alive long enough to get the population established again. The condors are not released by hand like this typically. This is a re-release. The very first release is what we would call it's soft. It's a soft release in that the pen doors are slowly open. There's no people around that they know of, and it's just like they're free to go now. And it's really funny. We have these Zoom chats with supporters who watch and participate while we do the releases. And every time it's the same thing. The birds don't go out right away. They're just too cautious. They're too smart. They're like, yeah, I don't know. I don't think I want to go out there. This is kind of nice in here. And then about 15, 20 minutes later, one of the birds will get enough courage to hop out the door, and then all of a sudden they all come piling out. Now, necessary evil, I should say, is to put these transmitters and tags on the birds. I describe it that way because really in the long term, our vision is that condors will fly around with nothing on them anymore. They'll be completely free of human intervention. And we're just not there yet. And we have to understand what happens to these birds, especially if there's a mortality factor that's especially troublesome. So these are essential. And they go on the wing because you can't put them on the leg, and you can't put them around the neck because they have this huge crop where they store 2 or 3 pounds of meat at a time. So you can't do that. So the only place you can really put them on is the wing or the tail, and tail feathers fall out. So that's the patagial is the best for condors. And this transmitter only weighs about 40 grams, and you're talking about a bird that weighs around 20 pounds. So even though it's on the wing, it's so lightweight it does not affect them at all, of course. So a lot of what we do is after release, of course, is keeping track of their whereabouts, finding their nests, discovering dead birds and causes of death, and so forth. So it's a year-round project. And years ago, when condors first started finding food on their own, it was most commonly sea lions on the beaches in Big Sur. This is a spot near Coast Gallery. It's called Sea Lion Cove. And there's a haul-out spot of around 200 or 300 individuals there pretty much every day. And the condors know that. And they feed there often. And unfortunately, they also feed on whales. And I did want to just include that because it has happened a few times. We don't want to see dead whales, but when it does happen, I can tell you it feeds the entire flock for months on end. The beach is almost like a cooler. It keeps it somewhat fresh, and for a condor, it only needs to be somewhat fresh. Of course, they're foraging on lots of different things. Condors are known to feed on at least 24 different species of mammals, as well as salmon and other fish species found on the beaches. They're really quite resilient, despite the fact that in the 80s, their population got down to just 22 individuals. They are very, very tough birds. And, nesting I mentioned it started happening in 2006. You remember the Basin Complex fire, 2008, burned much of the Ventana wilderness. This is a nest in a redwood tree that was scorched. And way up there on the top of the nest, about 180 feet up, was a chick. And we thought for sure this chick had died in the fire. So our main biologist, Joe Burnett, got in a helicopter, flew up there to the area, found a safe place to land, hiked over to the base of the tree, threw ropes over some branches, and managed to crawl all the way up into the top of this tree to find this chick had survived. And it had 2 or 3 inches of ash that it was standing in. Literally rose from the ashes. So, guess what we named this little bird? Phoenix. They're also nesting in cliff sites. About 50% here on the Central Coast are on cliff sites versus redwood trees. And no other tree have they used so far. Now, we mentioned DDT earlier in the context of bald eagles, and we know that the company that made DDT was dumping it in the Channel Island area and right out through the sewer system for decades. And there was a massive, environmental lawsuit that was won over that, and tons of money was spent to restore that environment. But by the time we discovered it was affecting condors, that money was already dried up. And so I was worried that if this is going to be a major problem, this could be a deal killer. Thankfully, after 10 years of study, we have now concluded that even though DDT is still in the marine environment, and mostly they're finding it through California sea lions, reproductively, they're doing just as well as Southern California birds. Now, they're not hatching quite as often. The rate isn't quite as good, but interestingly enough, birds that are raised in redwood trees have a far better success rate than cliff nests. Who would have figured? So it balances out. Even though their eggs aren't hatching quite as good, those that do hatch do have a better chance of making it. And then over time, we know that DDT is going to just slowly disappear in the environment as it has been already. So thank goodness we do not have to worry about DDT. Evidenced by, oh gosh, how many chicks? I wish I had the number. We've had so many chicks raised in wild nests now, I can't even recall the number. So, but the big culprit, lead poisoning. I'm surprised I haven't actually said it until now. I was trying hard not to. But you probably already knew that. This is an issue that's been talked about for a long time. It is new to some people. For us, we always kind of had a hunch that the lead poisoning was coming from ammunition, because by the way, lead poisoning has been known in the Condors since the 1980s when they were brought into captivity. But the problem was we didn't know exactly where it was coming from. We didn't have that smoking bullet, I should say, of that direct evidence. And it was just a very difficult thing to nail down. It just doesn't kind of make sense if they had ingested this bullet. This is not an animal that was shot. And then we started seeing this repeatedly. So we're like, okay, so it's definitely ammunition. Let's take a closer look at this. So we teamed up with researchers from UC Santa Cruz, and we did an isotope study to look at the ammunition that's commonly bought in the field and compared that to the lead isotopes in the blood of condors. And it matched. Go figure. Study after study shows that lead ammunition poses great risk to wildlife, especially birds and scavenging birds. So this is definitely the problem. There's no question about it. It also tends to leave fragments in the wound channel of the animals that are shot, and I think that's the reason why condors and other scavengers are repeatedly poisoned by lead but don't die, because they're swallowing these small fragments. And so they'll get sick for a little while, they'll survive it, and then they'll go get it again. And eventually, if they get sick a number of times, it just slows them down and they just can't perform as well. And if they get acutely poisoned, their digestive system shuts down and they literally just starve to death and die. And it's a horrible death. We've been looking at the causes of death for condors ever since we got started. The third ranked cause of death is power lines. Something around 15 birds over the last 25 years in all of California have been taken to power lines. The second rank is wildfire, actually, and we haven't gotten into the Dolan fire yet, but I will. That's unusual. I'll explain that here in a bit. And that was about the same number, so they kind of rank the same. Lead poisoning, 107 recorded, and that was, I haven't even updated this since, I think the last few months. I'm sure it's over 110. I mean, it's just a huge number. There's nothing else that comes close, and this is the factor that must be resolved. This is the bald eagle's DDT, and once we solve it, the condor will survive once again on its own. Well, the state of California really, just didn't engage hunters and ranchers on this issue for a long time, and then AB 711 went into, well, that's the later one. The first one was earlier than that. It required the use of non-lead ammunition in the Condor range, and then I think it was AB 711 that expanded it to statewide. But these are statutes that are being forced upon hunters and ranchers without really any meaningful discussion or education ahead of time. And so, of course, it was just controversial and an ugly mess. We were accused of trying to take away, hunters' rights, that we were against the Second Amendment, and all these things that absolutely not true whatsoever. And in fact, we even were publicly named by the NRA as like some group to despise or whatever. So I was pretty offended by that, because I grew up in West Virginia where there's more deer than people, and I shot a few of them. I grew up hunting. I have a respect for hunting. I don't hunt anymore, but I understand it. And I was offended by that. So right around that same time, we were talking with a local partner at the Fish and Game Commission, Monterey County Fish and Game Commission. And we're like, what can we do? How can we be more effective here? And he said to me, nothing short of handing out free ammunition would change most people's minds. And I went, interesting concept. Environmental wildlife conservation group giving out ammunition. I don't know. So we did a survey with members, and I was shocked. 95% said, heck yeah, we'll support you. Because I think they understood what the issue was. And they understood that if we don't solve this, the Condor is not solved. So we went ahead with it. And we've been providing free non-lead ammunition now for 10 years. Over $250,000 worth of product, an equal amount of money spent in staff time because we're delivering it. We're shaking people's hands at their gate, at their ranch, and having meaningful conversations, and it's working. I really think it's working. We have about 3,000 constituents that we've met with, and they know we're sincere, and we're just trying to solve this problem in a way that their livelihoods aren't affected. We also get really strategic. We have GPS transmitters on some of these condors, so we know exactly where they are pretty much all the time, and we can overlay that with land ownership, and we can kind of figure out where the hot spots are. In this case, we're only looking at data that is highly suggestive of feeding. So, this is where we can focus our energy. And of course, that's changing all the time. We're constantly looking at this. Now, typically, lead poisoning is the #1 threat every year. Well, it is every year. But then when you add a catastrophic wildfire on top of that, like what happened in 2020, it's really devastating. This fire was started by an arsonist, and it was not too far away from where the sanctuary is. And we had about 24 condors in the sanctuary that night. They do not fly at night. And 9 of them died. 2 chicks died in nests. The single most catastrophic condor loss of life in the history of the program. But it's a very, anomalous sort of situation. And over time, as these condors are going to be spread out over the landscape and not so, concentrated in one area where we're trying to keep them alive, we put food out for them to help mitigate the lead threat. And so that draws them in, at a higher concentration. So I think, when we're done with that, the birds are on their own and they're scattered all over the landscape. Wildfire is not going to be the #2 rank. It's going to keep dropping down. That's my prediction. So it's not a big concern to worry about. But I do have a couple of videos here, but I'm not sure how to start the video. Can you help me with that? There we go. Is it going? Yeah. So this little chick here is famous. She is named Iniko. And she was on camera with her parents. That's Kingpin, her father. And he was 24 years old in 2020, raising Iniko. Iniko means born during troubled times. And that was opened up to the public to provide that name, and they were only thinking of COVID at the time. And then the Dolan fire hit, so it was really apropos. If you could play the second video, in August of 2020, the Dolan fire burned through, and Iniko is now 5.5 months old, just a few weeks away from fledging. You can't hear the sound, but you can see the glow of the wildfire outside of the cavity. And cam viewers around the world were watching in horror as this was happening. And then the cable cut, the fire burned through the cable, and it was and nothing. And, my email and phone was just like bing, 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 bing. How's Iniko doing? Well, we couldn't get in there for a couple of weeks because the fire was still active. We finally did get into the territory, and her mother, Redwood Queen, was still caring for her, but Kingpin had died. And so then she was vulnerable trying to take care of her chick. And then another male named ninja came into the territory thinking he could take over the territory. Now, this is all on camera, by the way. That's why I'm sharing you this story, because people around the world know this story. And so Ninja comes in and kind of forces Iniko out of the nest and kind of crashes on the ground and is now injured. And we rescued Iniko, took her to the Los Angeles Zoo, and then just last December released her in San Simeon. And so she's out flying in the wild now. And what's interesting about this whole entire story is, you remember I mentioned Phoenix, who survived the Basin Complex fire in 2008. Well, Redwood Queen really likes Phoenix, and now they're a couple, and they're actually actively breeding as we speak. So, in Condor land, it's sort of like Days of Our Lives or something. It's a little bit of a, little bit of a soap opera, but, and you can watch them. That's right, Dan. You can connect with them on a personal level, and I think that's what we enjoyed doing. So anyway, the Dolan fire wiped out all of our facilities. We're actually going to start rebuilding in May, finally. All that is coming together really, really well. Our donors came through in a huge show of support. And we're going to have a little bit bigger facility. We'll be able to release a few more condors than we were able to prior. And the bunkhouse release facility will be much nicer for the biologists to go up there. Tribute to Kingpin. It really was a beloved condor. I mean, we still have people that ask about him. Yeah, and at the time we had around 100 birds in Central California, and that one fire knocked it down by around 10%. So it was pretty catastrophic. Thankfully, we're rebuilding not only the sanctuary facilities, but the flock as well. We're back up to a little over 90 birds right now, but we're still lower than where we were in 2019. And thankfully, because we have San Simeon, we're able to continue releases. If we only had Big Sur, we'd be sort of a ship without a sail right now. So thankfully, San Simeon is really huge. And as you can see, the population has steadily increased because of our captive breeding, releases of captive bred birds rather, and the wild production. But you can see we've had 2 years where the population has actually decreased. And that's a trend we don't want to see continue. During COVID, you heard a lot about supply chain problems and a lot of things you just couldn't get. Well, apparently that also affected ammunition. And as it is, non-lead ammunition only represents about 5% of the market share. Then you throw in COVID, and there are additional challenges. There were months on end where non-lead 22 ammunition was just simply not being sold anywhere. You couldn't buy it online. You couldn't get it anywhere in the local store. And so, 22 is extremely commonly used for the management of ground squirrels. And we've seen direct evidence of condors eating ground squirrels. They hear the gunshots. It's like a dinner bell. I mean, these are smart birds. So anyway, that's the problem. We're working on it. We're making really good progress. But we're not there yet. The market just isn't supporting it. That's the biggest problem right now. We have a lot of people who are willing to switch, but have a struggle to find the product. I put this in. I just kind of want to show you where condors are on the big, kind of 30,000 foot level. These data are skewed or biased toward Central California birds. That's why you see more pink. If these were Southern California condors, it would be the other way around. It would be a lot of dark, thicker pink areas in the south and very little in central. And that just reflects that even, that these birds can travel throughout that whole entire range, but don't typically do so. So despite the threats, I still stand here with a lot of hope. And I think we are on the right track. And I invite you to participate in any way that you can. There's ways to stay involved. The streaming cameras, of course, our social media sites. We're doing a lot more work with video these days. And our Zoom chats are very popular. I have probably around 150 or 200 people that come in every month. It's the last Thursday of the month, and it's really fun. People from all over the world, just like I'm sure you have, the same interest with whales all around the world. So anyway, any questions? I don't know if I have time, but that's all I have, so thank you.
Yeah, do bald eagles also suffer the same bad effects from the lead, and why are they not?
Yes.
investigated?
I always forget to answer that in my talk, but it's always one of the first questions that comes up, so thank you for that. And the reason is you think about mortality and reproduction, right? Those are the two factors. And like take rabbits, for example. They breed like crazy, right? They make tons and tons of them, but they don't live very long. So, lots of predators can take them, and their populations are going to be fine. Condors, bald eagles, but condors way more so than bald eagles, are much longer lived, so they can't withstand mortality at the same rate. It's in biology, it's of lead poisoning just as often. Their populations aren't affected because the reproduction can withstand it.
I enjoyed very much seeing the release of Iniko, and was it Jane?
Oh yeah, Jane Goodall and
And
and Rachel Carson and other female scientists.
it was a lot of fun being
Thank
able
you.
to watch them being released, and it just kind of, the circle of life kind of just reminded me that, okay, so this morning we had the Marine Mammal Center at 10 o'clock released a rehabilitated sea lion that had been malnourished. And so, anyway, it's just kind of exciting what we have going on here as far as these different organizations taking care of our wildlife and then releasing them. So it's
Thank you. Yeah, it takes a village. It takes us all, Someone asked me yesterday, I was on a panel for the California Wildlife Day, and they asked, something about, just how you go about your work or whatever. And I just answered by saying, I just try to leave the world a little bit better than it was before. And if everybody did that and we all pitched in and worked together, it's not me, we can accomplish a ton. We just got to put our egos aside and roll up our sleeves and get some work done.
So do condors have any predators?
No, not really. Golden eagles are very aggressive around them and have taken a couple condors, but no, not. There's no regular predator that feeds on them. No.
how do you identify, when they're flying around, what's the difference between, say, a buzzard, a vulture, and a condor? I mean, you can't tell the size when they're so high.
Yeah, the size. Yeah, you can't go by size. That's right. So a couple of things you want to look for. The condor will have a white triangular patch underneath their wing. It's sort of a gray color. It's not as pronounced when they're younger, but it's there, and that's unique. The golden eagle, if it's an immature, might have some white patches in the carpal region, but it won't be this whole triangular patch that goes from the whole length of the underside of the wing. Another thing is just how they hold their wings. They hold their wings extremely level. Turkey vultures, they tend to hold like a V, and they rock back and forth. And condor is steady, really flat and really steady. Condor also has a very short tail, kind of this, relative to those 10-foot long wings. That short little tail is like a rudder that they use to help with steering. But it's not long, like a turkey vulture and a golden eagle or bald eagle would have much longer tail. So there's a few things that you can look for.
You had mentioned the feeding sites, and we know that they're eating in the wild, obviously. How long after release are you feeding? Do you see very mature adults coming back to those feeding sites?
Mm-hmm.
And what percentage of the population is eating foraging from the wild?
I would think I don't have a number, but the vast majority of feedings are natural, and that's why we're getting in so much lead. We try to keep them on stillborn calves is what we provide them. We collect them from dairies, another wonderful collaboration, because those calves would just be rendered anyway. So I don't think they prefer those calves though. so if they can find something on their own, they do. So a lot of it is marine mammals, and from a lead perspective, that's a good thing. That's a really good thing. You know, I mean, you know, just compared to say inland where coyotes and ground squirrels are commonly shot and left in the landscape to be eaten by scavengers. That's the big issue. Way in the back.
Because you were just mentioning, like, they're probably getting grayed out because of lead. Is there any concern with, like, other pollutants like mercury or, like, any other persistent organic pollutants? Like, is that graying out?
So, yeah. To repeat the question, it was about other contaminants, other heavy metals and other contaminants, and nothing that we're concerned about. We're seeing, you know, the usual mercury, you know, not only DDT, but also, I can't remember the other one, but it's not causing eggshell thinning. Yeah, I mean, we're looking at all that stuff, but nothing is concerning us, put it that way, except for the DDT, and you know, and that's kind of on the way out.
Is domoic acid poisoning an issue with them when they're feeding on birdie mammals?
There's one case where domoic acid may have sickened a bird, but ironically, domoic acid is more of a benefit because it provides more foraging opportunities. Yeah, the life of a scavenger.
I don't think domoic acid is concentrated in the tissues very much of the sea lions.
Yeah, it's not, because it's biological, it's not like a
It may be in the stomach.
pesticide, you know. Yeah, it's not that persistent.
When they tried to find domoic acid, they actually had to look in the brains of sea lions to find the lesions and things.
What time was your chat, Condor chat on Thursday, the last
Oh,
Thursday?
4 o'clock.
4 p.m.
Yep. And we always record them and post them on our website in case you miss it. And I mentioned earlier we're doing a lot more with video. That whole story I shared with you about Phoenix and Redwood Queen and Iniko and all that, it's going to be actually made into a docuseries, and it's going to be fun. A self-produced docuseries. So hopefully it'll be good.
And they eat fish though as well?
Yeah, they've been seen feeding on salmon, not that often, but sometimes. Dolphins, sea otters, everything except birds.
And are the animals always carrying? They're always dead?
I mean, I guess if there was still a heartbeat, but it was just laying there. You know, there's a gray area. Well, anyway, thanks again. Really appreciate being here.
Do they hunt by smell like condors?
Thank you so much, Kelly. That was incredible. So our next talk is at noon.